My name is Carin Hartmann, and my story, I think, would not start from the very, very beginning, but from somewhere in the beginning where I was moving out of my comfort zone, which was Stockholm, a good job, feministic situation, and to Amsterdam, where I moved into an international theater surrounding, but also maybe 20-25 years back in time. I had a child with me, but I have never met in my own generation a housewife. That belonged to my mother's generation. And I was living a life where I could travel and do my things from the Swedish perspective. In Holland, that was very unusual, so I had to fight to be still in my own time, in another time. I was back in time. Then I was looking for a possibility to grasp my situation. What was my situation like? And as I said, I had moved back in time 20-25 years. I looked for a tool to express this. And it ended up in collecting postcards. At a point, I was in Paris. I went in to Centre Pompidou. I came out with a whole bag full of postcards. At the same moment, I started to see that I could do something. I worked in a museum of Far East in Stockholm. I was used to the expression in exhibitions, and I met a couple, and they were quarreling wildly in the end of their marriage. And I took the bag with the postcards and I turned it upside down on a table where we were going to have a supper. And I thought, I'm not going to be in Paris and have this wonderful dinner together with my husband and these quarreling people. So when they saw all these postcards, hundreds of postcards all over the table, I knew exactly I'm going to make an exhibition. And I made an exhibition called Men's Women that turned out in a catalogue. And it turned to be an exhibition that was in time what all the theories, the feministic theories, had a kind of urge to see this in something that was neutral or telling, or somebody else telling the story. And as it was mainly men who had made these pictures, it became a dialogue between this feminine and masculine, or femininity or masculinity, or what then later was called gender perspectives, was mainly more telling what was the tradition, the culture tradition that was carried in that. And this exhibition started in Stockholm, and there came hundreds and hundreds of people to the opening. And then there was a lecture afterwards, and there was 600 people waiting in the seminary room. And I got immediately the question, could you make an exhibition about men as well? And so I made this pendant, and they traveled together for at least 5 years. And at every place I built up seminars, and men and women were very willing in talking about this, as it was so dynamic somehow. And then in the end of the 80s, I moved back to Sweden, and I started to lecture in this what was called the gender perspectives in art and media. I then started to develop the thoughts about boy, how the boy was seen. And now, since Me Too, I have turned into the question of violence and where does it come from? Is it so that we see the male violence as something natural or aggression? something that we can't avoid because it's a biological thing? Or is it something that we could do something about, and how then? And my belief is, of course, that we can change these things, but we have to know much more about the psychology of the boy, of boys. And we have to start working much more with that predicament of a boy being born by a mother, a woman, and he's traveling away from that to an autonomy, and how the father, the importance of the father will develop, as we have the phenomena here that fathers can be home with their children. We have to explore that much more. It has to grow into our culture as something absolutely natural. And hopefully that in Europe we will have the same tradition growing along everywhere. Well, when I was 6 years old, there was an artist who came to our family. And he painted all of us, my brothers and my mother and me. And he told my grandmother who was an artist, and it's the only time ever in my life I've overheard secretly two grown-up people talking. And he said in a Finnish accent to my grandmother, "She's seen everything." And my grandmother said, "What do you mean? I have made 12 paintings of her and I can't catch it." I didn't understand it, but maybe 30 years later, I was in analysis in Amsterdam, and out came this story in my memory. And all of a sudden I understood what he was saying. And of course that was intriguing. What did he mean with that? And something else that was very important was that I started to make very strange drawings. And I couldn't understand where from it came. Then I had a friend who said, "You remember you had a grandmother who was a fairy tale writer?" Yeah, I said yes. And when she said that, I got such a shock because she forced me to show some of my grandmother's books, and you have the book in front of you. Then she found out that I had made a kind of trip back in memory to the age of 6, 7, where I had remembered her fairy tales. I didn't like them. She was published in America after the Second World War, and she was very, very popular. And she made books about little girls, 3 triplets or boys. And I thought they were very false. I was a country girl. My mother has taught me to ride and to do things like the boys. But I understood through this friend of mine that I had answered 7 of her stories in my way. And it meant that I had made another ending of the stories without knowing that I was answering her. So without the analysis, without my friend who understood this, something was lurking in there. I hadn't understood this. That became a book about my grandmother, partly, and me. And that led into an understanding of my grandmother, how she also, once upon a time, made a twist in her life to survive with her children, being an artist. She chose to become a fairy tale writer in order to take care economically about her family. So she grasps for something in herself, and she explored that, she developed that, and she became a world-famous writer. And her books are still there, and you can go to Barnes and Noble and Barnes and buy her books still. I would say wonderful, but I would wish would be many more men in numbers who did that, who felt that and didn't feel fear. I wish men to work with the problems he has around that, so that he would understand that it wouldn't take anything away from him. On the contrary, he will gain from that. We will all gain from that. We are more equal. Boys are in a way standing outside the understanding of their part of fertility. They will know that their sisters will be able to have a child, and they don't know when they're small what their part is in that. And I wish that I can work with a kind of program for small boys, younger boys, to understand that they are very important for the fertility. Otherwise, without their contribution, there will be no child at all. So that is something I'm working in my head on, how to do that. And I will try to get all the technical possibilities to prove through using old pictures that I showed you, that are many hundred years old, telling us a lot of the predicaments of being a boy or being a human being. Also that this part, so that a little child can understand I'm also important. I don't have to prove myself in being superior towards the little girl or the woman. I am equal. And I think that should lead to a less stressful period where boys could relax a little bit and feel what they feel. And also feel that they have the right to their feelings. And 200, 300 years ago, we had a man in the world who was expressing himself in full range. Now we have smallest his possibility to express himself. I think that's very dangerous, and that comes out in various dangerous ways. And that should also bring the little boy into the more emotional world, where he can feel empathy, which is a big question in our time. How to bring a boy into an empathetic world which he rules, instead of being ruled from the outside world where there is a lot of violence, and in the data games and so on, he is seeing things he shouldn't see, and maybe identifying with a completely different men that a woman would wish to share her life with.